Well, oh, thank you so much, Carla. Please write questions as we go in the chat, and if I can just get to them as I'm like going through the topics on the slides, I'll be more than happy to. If there's anything left at the end, I'll definitely try to make some time for additional questions. Um, I know you guys can hear and see me. I can't necessarily hear or see you, but I always like to have these presentations try to feel as interactive as possible. So please feel free to use the chat um, as much as you would like. And today we're going to be talking about meal planning for diabetes. I don't know about any one of you, but this time of year always kind of puts me in this like meal planning mode. I don't know. Where I live, today's the first day of school. And so I was walking my dog this morning and I saw a lot of kiddos walking to start the first day of school. And I think that just kind of always puts a lot of the clients that I work with too are like, okay, I would like to kind of start some meal planning, both for the work week or for kind of getting food ready to put in the freezer for the winter when maybe there's days we don't necessarily feel like cooking. So we're going to start out our presentation today talking about meal planning in a more generalized way. And then about halfway through, we're going to kind of hone in more specifically on how to meal plan if we are keeping blood sugar management in mind. So we will go ahead and get started if I can remember how to change the slides. There we go. Okay. So first and foremost, when I think, or in my experience, a lot of people, when they think of like meal planning, um, we typically get this idea of like, okay, all of these really picture perfect meals. I have to get these perfect containers with the, little individual sections and like brown rice and chicken and broccoli is this meal, and I'm gonna on Sunday evenings I'm gonna have time and I'm gonna prep my meals for the week, and I'm happily going to eat all of those meals throughout the week, and I'm gonna become a really great meal planner. In my experience working with clients, a lot of people try this and start out with this because this is the idea of meal planning that we have in our minds. And it might work for a week, it might work for a month, but then I find that most people tend to get burned out on eating either the same meal day after day. We might not have time on some Sundays to meal prep, or we just might be, tired after the weekend and don't really feel like diving into that. We kind of lose that momentum, that motivation. Um, these types of meals that we maybe think of if you like just went to a Google search to like meal planning for the week, meal prepping for the week. Um, might be exciting the first, day or two, but they can tend to get kind of boring after a while. And we may just be like eating them. They might be filling us up. They're nourishing our bodies, but they're tend to not like satisfy us after a time. And so we may be like, well, I ate that lunch or I ate at least part of it today, but I'm still like craving something else afterwards. Um, and so by all means, if this method works for you and it works for a long time, like more power to you. Go ahead and try it if that's something that you have in mind. But today I'm going to talk about meal planning that might seem a little bit more realistic and sustainable for long term. Okay, so why meal plan? Hopefully, if you want to meal plan, if you have this as a goal, kind of from this transitional time from summer to fall, you have one of these 5 reasons in hand or in mind. It can definitely save time, while yes, it takes a bit more time up front. when when it boils down to like, okay, I just grab my lunch out of the fridge and go, or I don't have to like make a decision on what I'm going to eat for lunch, either prepping it when it's Wednesday at noon, um, or I don't have anything, so I'm just going to end up getting takeout again. um, I can save a lot of money. Speaking of getting takeout again, we all, I'm sure, have felt the impacts of increased food prices over the last 3, 4 years. It's seemingly like almost doubled to get takeout, to eat out, to get certain groceries. We know that food prepped at home is almost always going to be a surefire way to just have more inexpensive meals and be able to stick within our food budget a bit more. Meal planning can reduce food waste. This one might not seem quite as obvious as the timer money, but we're going to talk about today how to kind of start your meal planning with reduced food waste in mind. Um, Less stress once we get in a practice of meal planning. It just kind of becomes routine, and we don't necessarily need to be feeling like we're doing these exhausting mental gymnastics over day-to-day food decisions, because that thought, that effort has already been put in. And then lastly, nutrition. If you have certain health goals, if you have certain nutrition focused goals, such as balancing blood sugar, managing your diabetes, um, for you or your family, we're just able to control, what goes into our food if we're prepping it at home, much more than if we are choosing to eat out more frequently. Um, if anybody else has any other reasons why they want to start meal planning, please put it in the chat. I would love to hear it. Okay, so I don't expect anybody to leave this presentation and immediately become like an all-star meal planner, planning out 5 days of meals every single week. And it's going to be really easy and sustainable. I know if meal planning is new to you, or if prepping more food from home is more new to you, it's going to be much easier if we just take a smaller bite off. We're really just going to start with meals that tend to be more simplistic, kind of get the hang of that, and then build our way up onto more complicated meals. So when I say start small, I typically like to think of or small, more simple meals. I tend to think of like snacks as being a really great starting place. Um, if we are managing our blood sugars, we want to ensure that we are eating about every 4 hours. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later in our presentation today. Um, but for most of us, that kind of leads to having 3 meals and 1 or 2 snacks a day, and that is really helpful and beneficial for kind of managing the whacks and wanes in our blood sugars that we would expect to have during the day. And so, um, starting out with snacks, an afternoon snack I find is the most common. We're going to talk about balanced snacks later today, but is this one that we can start thinking of? I always like to encourage people to think, okay, if I'm thinking of snacks, I'm just going to include 2 different food groups. I'm going to include a protein, and I'm going to include a carbohydrate that provides, we call them a complex carbohydrate. So a carbohydrate that provides some fiber or some starchiness, to make it a more low, slow type of carbohydrate for managing our blood sugars. Um, and then that protein is also going to help with that blood sugar response, and also just make us feel more satisfied from a snack. Um, Kind of the next step in meal snack complexity I often like to think of is breakfasts. Breakfasts tend to be a more simplistic meal for most of us, and so start with snacks, move to breakfasts, and then perhaps lunches and dinners come next. Um, Hopefully, most of you are okay with leftovers. I know most of us, or I know some people are really not leftover people, and that's okay too. But leftovers can bode really, really well for lunches if you like to have leftovers. But also, we'll talk about some other ideas for quick, easy things to pack for lunches today as well. Okay, so I have 5 steps that I like to follow when I am creating my own personal meal plan for the week. Um, and this is going to really help achieve those 5, reasons to meal plan that we start out with. Um, so my step 1, rather than just immediately jumping to recipes that I want to make, or like new things I have in mind to prep, I really start with just looking at what I already have that didn't get finished over the last week, over the weekend. Um, Specifically what perishable foods. So that oftentimes is going to be leftovers. Maybe I have cooked some rice and I have some leftover container of rice in the fridge. Um, Maybe I made like a sauce or a dressing or a marinade and I have some leftovers of that. Maybe I bought a container of spinach and I used part of that for a recipe and the other half is still in my fridge. And if I don't plan to do something with it, it's just going to kind of get wilty and sad and slimy and end up getting tossed. Um, so think particularly like what items do I need to use this week or else they're probably going to need to get tossed? Are there any items that you're going to need to use more towards the beginning of the week? Maybe these are kind of like, okay, I'm going to need to plan a meal starting with these items first. So what I like to do is I like to look at my kitchen, look at the ingredients that I have on hand that feel the most perishable. Typically, these are going to be produce, um, or like leftover, like legumes, beans, grains that I have cooked. Sometimes dairy products too. Like maybe I've used some ricotta cheese for a recipe and I have half of the container of ricotta left. And I'm like, oh, I should use this soon or it's going to get forgotten in the back of my um, dairy drawer and it's going to start to get moldy. So I'll start here. Um, I write a list of all of the perishable items that I have. Um, and then I move on to, okay, what else do I have going on in my kitchen? Do I have other um, items that I could potentially incorporate that are going to be going bad soon as well, but maybe don't need to be prioritized as quickly as like those leftover components? Um, Step 3 is shopping my pantry, and when I say pantry, yes, I literally mean the dry goods in my pantry, whether I have dried grains, beans, nuts and seeds, um, oils, vinegars, but I also like to kind of think of my pantry as being my fridge and my freezer as well. So I like to get in the habit of, if I have rice that I haven't used all of, I like to just pack it up and put it in my freezer, or beans, and I like to pack them up and put them in my freezer. They're not going to last forever. They're maybe going to last a month, maybe two, but I'm going to need to use those sooner than later. So, what else do I have on hand that I can potentially incorporate into a meal? So, you're really starting like your meal ideas or your grocery list with what you already have on hand rather than just starting from a completely blank slate. And that's how meal planning can really help reduce food waste. So, s- step 4 is kind of where you're like, okay, I got to fill in the blanks with what I don't have on hand. Um, Once you've completed steps 1 through 3, you've kind of got a list written down of things that you need to be using up. this is where I'm like, okay, here's these items. Is there anything I can think of that I can kind of throw these together to make a meal that I know that I like? Maybe you could get creative with like some tacos, um, or you have some cucumbers on hand and you have some rice on hand. Okay, that's two meal components. Do I have a protein that I can include with this meal? Um, One thing, if I'm kind of just not feeling very creative or inspired once I've even created this list, I like to pull down my cookbooks from my shelf in my kitchen. I flip to the back to the index pages and I look up the ingredients specifically that I need to use. Um, or I go to my favorite food bloggers, and I'm gonna have a list of some of my favorite food bloggers to use when I personally meal plan at the end of this presentation. But I like to go to my favorite food bloggers, and they all have a search bar uh, on their blog, and I type in the ingredients specifically that I'm looking for, and it is gonna pull up a list of different recipes that include that ingredient, and that kind of gives me like a starting place of okay, do any of these sound good? Also, really importantly, do any of these sound good? And also, do they have another ingredient included in this recipe that I already have on hand after I've taken a peek at my fridge, my pantry, kind of all the things that I have stocked up in my kitchen already. And so, once you have an idea of like a type of meal or something that you want to make, okay, now is when you look at the ingredients list for that recipe and see what do I not have for this recipe? Is there anything that's really close that I could potentially substitute in this recipe? Um, Maybe, for example, does a recipe call for a red onion and all you have is a white onion? Or maybe even you have some green onions, but slicing green onions is just going to work just fine in that recipe. Um, Maybe the recipe calls for a certain grain. You don't necessarily have that grain, but you have a different grain. Those are going to be an easy swap in that recipe. Um, Maybe some greens that, you know, maybe a recipe calls for chard, with Swiss chard, and you don't have that, but you have like kale or collard greens or something like that. That could be an easy swap. Um, and so ideally, when it's all said and done and we create our grocery list, it's going to be a shorter grocery list than if we were to just start our meal planning from scratch, which can help with our food budget. Um, So then we make our grocery list, we go grocery shopping. Um, for something that has started during COVID that has continued, at least in the area that I live, that a lot of the clients I work with really love to take advantage of, is grocery shopping. A lot of the grocery stores here offer, you can make your online order. They have like apps on the phone and they'll do the shopping for you and you can just pull in and pick it up. A lot of people, especially if we are busy, that can be so handy to take advantage of. You can place your order the night before, place your order that morning, and then drive and pick it up on your way home. So if that is an option in your area, it can be really, really helpful, especially for busy weeks. So something to look into. Um, but if not, if you're still going to the grocery store, getting the remainder of the items on your grocery list. Um, I always like to recommend thinking of, if there's like a 5-day Monday through Friday work week, um, I typically only like to plan like 3 or 4 meals just to give myself some flexibility so I don't have like an overwhelming amount of leftovers, or maybe I end up eating out one night for whatever reason, or we have some social plans that isn't necessarily convenient to eat food at home. Um, and so I typically don't like to plan like 5 days of meals. I like to plan 3 or 4. And then also when I'm looking at my grocery list, I'm like, okay, well, do I have snacks on hand? And also, do I have like breakfast items on hand? So make sure you're including or being mindful of these when creating your grocery list. And then when you get home, um, step 5 in my meal planning is oftentimes, we have this great meal plan. We're gonna incorporate more produce in our snacks and our meals this week. Um, or we're gonna try cooking a dried grain or a dried legume and see how that goes because that's really cost effective. Um, and we get home and we just put all our groceries away, and then the evening comes around, and you don't necessarily have the time or energy uh, to do all this bulk prep work. And so, what I recommend is if you have certain things in mind that you are going to include in your week's work, can you also include a bit of time when you get home from the grocery store to practice some good storage of these foods? So that might be like chopping and washing some greens. If we have like a head of romaine lettuce or red leaf lettuce or kale or anything that we're going to include um, for salads for the week, for example, if we just throw that whole head of romaine lettuce in our fridge, it's going to start to get wilty within the next day or two. So what I always recommend is just chopping it up right there, throwing it in your salad spinner, and then putting it in a Tupperware container, and it's going to stay crispy and nice for about a week. Um, if you bought, instead of like baby carrots to dip in hummus, maybe you bought like bigger carrots that you want to chop. And then you have a break in your afternoon and your work day. You go to the fridge to pull out some carrots to snack on, but you still have to wash and chop them. You might just opt to grab some crackers or something else like that instead. So can you do that prep work of like washing and chopping? Portion out like bundles of grapes and wash them in containers if you're going to be grabbing it and taking these snacks with you. Um, so doing what you can, we're going to talk about some more produce storage practices. Um, but ensuring that when you get home from the store, kind of setting aside some time to do this. Not only does it help with, just keeping food fresh, but that also helps maintain um, the quality of the food, which helps maintain the nutrients that that foods provides. Oftentimes, especially when we're talking about fresh produce, certain nutrients such as vitamin C, which is a really strong antioxidant, tend to degrade over time as the produce quality degrades and as kind of time passes. Okay, so other considerations when we are creating our meal plan for the week. Um, think ahead, what does your week look like? Do you have a pretty busy week where you're going to have less time at home to meal plan? You're going to be out of the house more often due to evening plans? Or are you going to have more time? Or are you feeling extra burned out and tired this week? Or oh, good question. I'm going to answer Carolyn's question really quickly. Is it better to get bagged lettuce that's already washed and bagged? You totally can. There's not a problem with that at all. I always just kind of use your best judgment when checking bagged lettuce. Sometimes you can get bagged lettuce and it's already kind of starting to look a little sad or slimy. So just make sure you're like using your eyes. When I buy bagged salad kits, sometimes I'll make sure I check. I might choose like one that's a little further back because usually they're doing first in, first out methods. Um, there's nothing wrong with choosing already washed and baked lettuce. Typically, it's just going to be a little bit more of a cost point than just buying it in bulk. Good question. Um, okay. Um, so what does your week look like busyness wise? Do you anticipate what your energy is going to be like this week? What about the weather forecast? Um, Is it gonna be, starting to get some kind of fall evenings where we're gonna be like, "Ooh, I'm kind of starting to feel in the mood for some cozier meals." Or are we still in the 90 degrees and you're like, "Nope, cold, more like fresh meals are gonna be sounding really good." We're not gonna feel like soup or chili or those kind of things on super hot days, and we're not necessarily gonna feel like, a taco salad on really cold days most often, and so, um, take that into consideration as well. Um, and then lastly, is this gonna be a particularly stressful week? If so, can you maybe include some more convenience food items in your meal plan? I find that oftentimes with a lot of the clients that I work with, um, they feel like you're kind of like stuck in this pattern of not making a plan. It's dinner time, it's hungry, it's getting late. I would have to like think of something to make. I would have to maybe go to the store and get groceries and do it. And it just sounds like too much. And we end up getting takeout. And when that kind of is on, when those patterns tend to be on repeat, those are when they start to maybe not feel the best with us or aligned with our health goals. Um, as opposed to when we have like a plan for the week and we just anticipate that this week is going to be exhausting, this week is going to be stressful. Um, I'm gonna plan some lunches. I'm also maybe just gonna go get a Trader Joe's frozen meal that's gonna be really easy to whip up. Maybe I'm gonna have like a frozen pizza one night. Maybe I'm planning to just eat out while we're out and about running errands one night. But when these more convenience food options tend to be more planned, they it oftentimes just feels better for us than when it feels like it's this only option that we tend to be kind of falling back on. So I don't know if any of you can empathize with that. Okay, so this meal planning method works really, really well if we tend to have a well stocked pantry. Um, so I like to assess the ingredients that I use on a regular basis. And the way that I like to meal plan is or kind of keep my grocery list ongoing. I like to use my phone. I like to use my notes app. I use the little feature where you can do a little check mark next to your grocery items. Um, and then when I'm in the store, I just have my phone. I share my notes app with my husband. And so maybe I'm home all day and I'm like, hey, can you stop and get these few things on the way home? He already has that grocery list on his phone. It makes it a really convenient way to grocery shop. So of course, weekly, I'm adding groceries that I'm going to be making in meals for the week. But then also, say I use the last of the cumin in my spice drawer. Well, I know I use cumin on a pretty regular basis. I'm just going to go ahead and add cumin to my grocery list, even if it isn't included in my meal plan this week. Um, or like a vinegar that I use regularly, maybe olive oil, all of these things I just get in the habit of when I'm out, I just add them to my grocery list automatically. So in my pantry, I like to keep things like herbs and spices, grains, nuts and seeds, different oils and vinegars, um, nut butters like peanut butter, almond butter, sunflower seed butter. If you have somebody who can't have nuts, that's a good alternate. Um, Bouillon, I like to have chicken bouillon, veggie bouillon, or beef bouillon. Um, Canned proteins like beans, canned chicken, canned tuna, salmon, those can all be really helpful for quick meals. Dried pasta. Um, and then, like I said earlier, I like to include my refrigerator or freezer um, in my pantry, kind of, or how I think of my pantry. So, including like butter, cheese, yogurt, keeping frozen produce, frozen fruits or veggies on hand can be super helpful for when we just don't have anything fresh, but we're really wanting to add a produce to one of our meals. Um, Broth, I like to make homemade bone broth whenever I've leftover bones from a meal, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. Um, Breads, sometimes it's hard to get through a whole loaf of bread before it gets stale or before it starts to get moldy. And so what I like to do is I like to buy like pre-sliced bread. Or this is a case a lot with like hamburger or hot dog buns too, if we don't get through all of them. just put them in the freezer and then find a way to use them here soon. Um, Extra sauces. So maybe if you're making homemade pizza and you bought a whole jar of pizza sauce and you didn't use all of it, can you put it in a smaller container and put it in the freezer? Label it pizza sauce, date it, and then that could be another ingredient consideration for meals going forward. Um, so having a well-stocked pantry can be really helpful. Having an equipped kitchen regarding like food storage can be super helpful. Um, it can be so frustrating to have containers that you don't have lids for or that tend to leak. So make sure you have some good food storage containers. Um, they have them at Costco. You can even get really good quality ones at like the dollar store or Dollar Tree. Um, so make sure you have ones with like locking lids that don't leak. I really like silicone storage bags because they're really great to freeze foods in. If I buy bananas and I'm starting to get some freckled bananas, I will peel them all. I will break them in half and I'll stash them in my storage bag, my silicone storage bag, and I'll keep them in the freezer. And then I'll pull one out for smoothies, or maybe I make banana muffins or banana bread or something like that with them. Um, if I buy a pound of like Italian sausage for a recipe, but I'm only going to be using half a pound, I'll put the other half pound in one of those silicone storage bags and they freeze really well. And then my favorite part is they're just dishwasher safe. And so I can reuse them time and time again. And then I like to keep a variety of mason jars on hand as well. Um, I really like to get the instead of like the two-part metal lids, they do sell like a it's like more of a plasticky material lid, but it seals really well. And then use those on repeat for food storage and they're dishwasher safe as well. Um, and then other meal prep friendly kitchen tools that I couldn't recommend having more are a salad spinner, for washing greens. That's really helpful. A garlic press can really help when you're constantly adding fresh garlic cloves to recipes so you don't have to spend the time chopping them. A mandolin can be super helpful when you're really like thinly slicing um, veggies. An instant pot. I love my instant pot. I use it a lot for cooking beans and rice and making bone broth. Um, if you cook tofu often, a tofu press can be really helpful. A food processor or a small blender. Silicone baking mats, those can just be washed and reusable instead of always using parchment paper and having to toss it. Sheet pans, I like to have the different sizes of the rimmed sheet pans, kind of the small one and the bigger one. Um, and then the last two, I think, are the most important, good quality knives and good quality pots and pans. If we're going to be really frustrated with how sharp our knives are, we're probably just not going to be as inspired to use them. Or if our pots and pans are constantly like sticking, it's going to be really frustrating to be cooking with them on a regular basis. So if you're going to invest in anything, I always recommend good knives and good pots and pans. All right. Here's a few meal planning tips and tricks. Um, what I like to do is I keep a freezer scrap bag. So if I am cutting an onion and I cut off, the top and bottom, but there's always a little bit of onion left on that, or I peel the outside, um, put it in a freezer scrap bag. If I'm prepping carrots and I cut off all the tops of the carrot, like the stem part, put that in a freezer scrap bag. Um, if I have like leftover herbs that I don't end up using, like rosemary, thyme, parsley, um, or if I'm prepping like celery and I have the bottom, like the root part of the celery, put it in the freezer scrap bag. And then when I get a full bag, I like to make broth with it. You can make it on the stovetop, or I like to do it in my instant pot. I like to make a bunch of broth. I like to put it in containers and freeze it and then use it in recipes throughout the week. So that's one way to reduce food waste. If I'm going to be making meals that I know freeze really well, so for example, enchiladas or chicken pot pies or soups like chicken noodle soup or lasagna, things like this. You're already making the mess in your kitchen. You're already doing all of the work. Go ahead and just double the recipe and freeze the other half. That can be super helpful on nights when you want to eat something from home. You don't necessarily want to get food out. Um, but you don't feel like cooking anything. It can be as simple as pulling stuff out and popping it in the freezer. Um, Packing food grab and go style. So, kind of like I said, when you get home from the grocery store and you're prepping food, even if we're working from home, it can be really helpful just to pack food as if we're going to be leaving home. Chances are we're just much more likely to grab the container of the cut up cheese or the pre portioned out fruits or veggies for snacks if they're ready to go than if you have to like cut and prep them all in the kitchen. Um, I like to do a produce box subscription or a CSA if you have a goal of including a lot more produce in your week. And then it gives you kind of a starting place of, okay, I need to plan my week based off of all of these veggies that I have. You can make a big sheet pan of mixed veggies and then just cook them or like include them in meals throughout the week. Eat them with eggs for breakfast, have them as a side dish for lunch. Um, Make a quick bowl with them with like a green and a protein. Um, Freeze excess fruit that you don't quite get to, toss it in smoothies, or you can, make muffins with it or other baked goods. Making homemade dressings or sauces. And then thinking of like, is there one large food item that I can make that I can use in multiple ways? So, for example, if you bought a rotisserie chicken, maybe you're going to be making like chicken tacos with it for part of the week. You're going to be making salads with it another part of the week. And then if you still don't get to all of it, you shred it up and put it in the freezer. And then maybe you can use it for a meal or toss it in soup or something like that going forward. Um, we're getting into fall, so we're getting into like big winter squash season, but that could be helpful too for um, like a big pumpkin or something like that that you're going to be cooking. All right. So now we're going to move on to more specifically meal planning for diabetes. Um, when we are thinking about managing our blood sugars, there are kind of two components that we want to think of. The first is food consistency. So, like I said at the beginning, ideally, most people's bodies, especially when we're talking about managing blood sugars, really like regular access to food. They like to have a nice like lull in our blood sugars, eat a meal, and have a nice gradual rise in our blood sugars, and then a nice gradual fall. When we have larger gaps between meals, this is when our blood sugar rises and falls can be a lot more steep and drastic. And this is when we can kind of feel pretty crummy. Um, and it's not a very good way to just manage our sugars for diabetes management. So, if we are eating about every 4 hours for most of us, like I said earlier, this looks like having 3 meals and one or two snacks in between. Um, for most of us, we don't necessarily have to think about carbohydrate counting. Um, but I like to bring this up, oftentimes when we hear about diabetes, I hear a lot of people are automatically like, "Oh, I can never eat carbs again. I can never have pasta again." Um, and they think that this is just a food group that we just totally need to avoid. That's not necessarily the case. And actually, if we are including carbohydrates in our meals, um, alongside with other, low, slow carbohydrates, alongside with other um, food groups that help to manage our blood sugars. This is going to be a really helpful tool for managing our blood sugars. Um, so if you are somebody who reads food labels at all, generally we want to aim for about 60 grams of carbohydrates with meals and about 30 grams carbohydrates with snacks. And so it is recommended to include carbohydrates. You don't necessarily have to start carb counting, but sometimes that could be kind of a helpful starting place if you are looking at like, well, what portions of these foods are going to help me to manage my blood sugars. Um, so meal consistency, the first really important part of managing our blood sugars. Nutritional balance is the other half of that really important consideration. So we want to ensure that with our meals, we are including these 4 food groups. Um, we are going to be including produce. So fruits and veggies, these should be taking up the largest portion on our plate. Um, for most of these, they're going to be lower in carbohydrates, they're going to be including water, and they're going to include fiber. So they are going to help overall that meal to have a lower, slower blood sugar response because of that fiber component. Um, we want to include protein, and protein should take up about a quarter of our plate. Um, Protein contributes to that satiety factor, or feeling satisfied from a meal. It also helps aid in blood sugar management. So, again, it's going to cause a lower, slower blood sugar reaction from the carbohydrates included in this meal. Um, the next quarter of our plate is carbohydrates. And yes, they are important to include with meals because they are broken down into blood sugar, blood glucose, which is the fuel that every cell in our body needs. Our brain cells, our essential organ cells, everything that we need to get through the day relies on glucose. That is the fuel that drives it. Um, but we want kind of a lower and slower trickle of carbohydrate of blood glucose into our bloodstream so that our cells can kind of suck it up at an appropriate rate rather than um, a drastic response. And so carbohydrates that do include fiber and are more starchy. So if we think like corn and potatoes or whole wheat or whole grain products. These are going to be more complex carbohydrates, and our body has to digest the carbohydrates alongside these fibers or these complex starchy structures. Um, and I like to think of it as being kind of like a drip system of a blood sugar response, as opposed to like turning a hose on full blast when we're having um, more simple carbohydrates such as refined flours, white rice, and so on. And then lastly, healthy fats. Fats aren't necessarily going to take up like a portion on our plate for most of us, but oftentimes we're going to be getting fats in the protein that we eat, especially if we're eating like animal-based proteins, dairy products. You're going to be getting them in like olive oil that you cook your veggies in, or a sauce or a dressing. And so oftentimes fats are included in a meal without necessarily having to put too much thought in. Um, but they don't necessarily take up like a portion on our plate as the carbohydrates, proteins, and produce do. Okay, so what does nutritional balance with meals actually look like? With snacks, I briefly talked about this in the beginning, but we want to include a protein and a complex carbohydrate or produce. So think of these 2 components with snacks. With meals, there's going to be 4 components, a protein, a complex carbohydrate, a produce, and nourishing fats. So I have a few examples. So some breakfast ideas, a whole wheat English muffin that provides those complex carbohydrates, eggs for the protein. Eggs also do provide some fat as well. And then spinach, bell peppers, and onions, kind of sauteed in with the eggs for our produce. Oatmeal with berries, nut butter, and chia seeds. Avocado toast with hard boiled eggs. Smoothies with yogurt, um, greens, nuts and seeds can be added to smoothies. A breakfast hash also of like roasted veggies and a poached egg on top. Some snack ideas or yogurt, berries, nuts and seeds, veggies and hummus, apples with peanut butter, cottage cheese with pineapple, whole wheat crackers and cheese. Lunch ideas, a meat and cheese sandwich on whole wheat bread with low carb veggies and some berries. A soup with non-starchy vegetables and legumes, and maybe eating with some whole grain crackers. A salad with veggies, a hard-boiled egg, and a whole grain roll. This one, speaking of salad kits that we were talking about earlier, I really like to take advantage of like salad kits for quick, easy lunches. If I don't have anything else planned, I like to get the Taylor's Farm. They have like a salsa ranch or an avocado ranch or something like that. So I like to get that chopped salad kit. I'll buy a can of black beans. I'll rinse it. I'll toss it in with the salad. And then I like to wrap it up in a like burrito size whole wheat tortilla and kind of make a salad wrap. And you're getting your carbs, your complex carbs from the tortilla. Also some carbs in the beans, but the beans provide protein and then lots of produce. That could be a really yummy meal, especially on hot days, and takes less than 10 minutes. Pastas with salmon, asparagus, or other veggies. Dinner ideas, spaghetti and meatballs. I like to throw in extra produce in my spaghetti sauce, and then having it with maybe some sauteed summer squash, maybe a side salad. Grilled chicken with a baked potato and broccoli, stir fry with mixed veggies, brown rice, and tofu, or enchiladas with steak, peppers, and onions. So hopefully that gives you kind of some ideas of this, what a meal would actually look like when we're following this nutritional balance idea. Here is a list of some of my favorite food bloggers. The handles are their Instagram pages, but if you just look up like feasting at home, you'll find their page as well. I like to go to these for inspiration. I like to follow them on social media and save recipes, and I'm like, ooh, that looks really good. But I visit these sites regularly when I am meal planning for the week and I need somewhere to type in the ingredients that I want to use to get some meal ideas. Oh, I will say I love this bottom one, Food Gawker. It's like a site. It's kind of like Pinterest, but just for food blogs. And so I love it because the search engine feature is really great. So say you have like a really specific ingredient, you can type it in the search bar and then you can search like dinner recipes or even like seafood recipes or snack recipes, and it pulls up. So it's like a more curated search feature than just like only searching the ingredients. So that it used to be an app, it is no longer, but I still like to go to that website. All right. Does anybody have questions? I feel like I flew through that material, but hopefully it was helpful. I can go back to any slides, and I'm more than happy to continue answering meal planning, food storage questions for the last 8 minutes that we have.
So, Paige, there was a question earlier of,
Mhm.
is it better to get lettuce that is already washed and bagged?
Yeah, so yeah, we I touched on that back when I was talking about food storage, but we can buy an already pre-washed and bagged lettuce is totally fine. Just use your best judgment, which you can, use your best judgment with any produce. If stuff is looking kind of sad or wilty, maybe don't purchase it. Maybe purchase something else that's looking better. Maybe compare if you're buying bagged lettuce, compare a few different bags and see if one is looking a little bit better. There's not a problem with buying already bagged and washed greens. The cost might just be slightly higher than if we are buying them more like in their whole form and have to do a little bit more prep work for them.
All right. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions, comments, concerns? Caroline, I hope that answered your question. I'm not sure if she's still, oh yeah, she's still on the call. Yeah, if you have any questions, please, jot them down to that page. Can answer them. Okay, so there's no typing. I'm going to take a guess that no one has any questions for Paige. Carolyn said yes, thank you. Okay, her question was answered. Perfect. Okay, so if no one else has any more questions, then I think we can close it out here. Thank you, Paige, for joining us today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us, too. I know it's the middle of the day, and people have busy schedules, so we had a good turnout. Come back next WOW Wednesday, which is going to be September 25th, same time. And Paige is also going to be joining us next month. We still have to figure out the topic for that. But if you're interested in that, it is free to everyone. And you can register online or follow us on our social media pages just to keep, up to date on when the next class will be. It's obviously going to be the fourth Wednesday of next month. Registration will just be uploaded before then. But thank you, everyone. Again, we will see you next WOW Wednesday. I hope you guys took away some knowledge from this lovely presentation that Paige created for us today. So, yes, we'll see you guys all next WOW Wednesday. Everyone have a good day.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for having me.